The silence in the grand echoing halls of the old estate was not merely an absence of sound, it was a presence, thick and heavy, like velvet drapes drawn against the world. It was a silence that held secrets, that whispered of centuries past, and within its profound stillness resided a portrait unlike any other. It depicted a woman, Lady Seraphina, her features rendered with such exquisite detail that she seemed poised to step out of the canvas, her gaze fixed on something beyond the viewer, imbued with an ethereal, almost otherworldly calm. Her hands, delicately clasped, rested in her lap, and a faint, enigmatic smile played upon her lips, a smile that promised serenity, yet somehow hinted at a hidden depth, an unspoken narrative. The light seemed to fall upon her in a way that defied the room's actual illumination, casting her in a perpetual, gentle glow. It was a striking piece, undeniably beautiful, yet an inexplicable tension lingered around it, a subtle hum of unease that permeated the air, an invisible thread pulling at the edges of one's perception, suggesting that this tranquil beauty was merely a veil. This ancient estate, with its sprawling grounds and labyrinthine corridors, had recently become the unlikely inheritance of Alara. A young woman accustomed to the vibrant, bustling pulse of city life, Alara found herself transplanted into a world of quiet grandeur and forgotten histories. Her initial feelings upon arriving were a complex tapestry of emotions, a profound awe at the sheer scale and intricate craftsmanship of the ancestral home, a wistful nostalgia for a past she never knew but felt connected to, and an undeniable touch of loneliness that settled deep in her bones in the vast empty rooms. The house was a living monument to her lineage, a silent testament to generations long gone. It was during one of her exploratory forays into the dust-laden reaches of the attic, a forgotten realm of trunks and shrouded furniture, that she stumbled upon the portrait. Tucked away behind a stack of moth-eaten tapestries shrouded in a thin layer of grime, Lady Seraphina emerged, her painted eyes seemingly meeting Alara's across the decades. Alara was instantly captivated. The portrait, despite its age and neglect, exuded an undeniable magnetism. Lady Seraphina's calm, almost ethereal beauty was arresting, her composure seemingly untouched by time or circumstance. There was a timeless elegance in her pose, a quiet dignity that resonated with Alara. Despite the vast differences in their lives, she felt an immediate, inexplicable pull towards this distant ancestor, a sense of kinship with the serene figure on the canvas. Deciding that such a masterpiece deserved far more than the ignominy of an attic, Alara carefully, painstakingly brought the portrait down to her study. It was a room she had chosen for its ample light and the comforting presence of an enormous antique mahogany desk. Without much thought, she positioned the painting on the wall directly opposite a colossal, ornate mirror that had been a permanent fixture in the study for as long as anyone could remember. Its gilded frame, intricate and dark with age, perfectly complemented the painting, creating a striking visual dialogue between the two pieces. The first night in her new routine, as the shadows lengthened and the old house settled into its nocturnal creaks and groans, Alara found herself unwinding with a book in her study. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast a warm pool of light, leaving the rest of the spacious room in a gentle gloom. She glanced up, her eyes idly drifting towards the portrait, then to its reflection in the grand mirror opposite. For a split second, a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, something seemed profoundly off. The reflection of Lady Seraphina, usually a perfect, reverse duplicate of the painted image, appeared to shift. Was it a subtle tightening around the eyes, a hint of sorrow where there was only calm in the original? Or perhaps a shadow deeper and more defined playing across the reflected visage, suggesting a subtle contortion of the mouth that was entirely absent from the serene painting? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, dissolving back into the familiar, tranquil image. Alara blinked, rubbing her tired eyes. She dismissed it instantly, attributing the anomaly to the late hour, the dim light, or simply the fatigue of a long day spent moving into a house that felt both welcoming and overwhelmingly vast. Yet despite her rationalization, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of unease had been planted deep within her mind, a prickle of intuition that refused to be entirely ignored. The tranquil beauty of the portrait, once a source of comfort, now held a whispered question, a silent challenge to her perception of reality. The mirror, usually a simple reflector of the world, seemed to hold something more. Before we delve deeper into Alara's unsettling discovery, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our chilling stories. The fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in the portrait's reflection had been easily dismissed that first night, attributed to the play of shadows, the unfamiliarity of her new surroundings, or simply the exhaustion of settling into the ancient estate. Alara had told herself it was nothing, a trick of the mind. Yet as the days bled into a week, an insistent nagging curiosity began to take root, blossoming into a quiet obsession. She found herself drawn to the study, not for the books or the comforting silence, but for the silent vigil she kept over the painting and its mirrored counterpart. With each passing day, the subtle unease sharpened into a distinct, troubling observation. The painted Lady Seraphina remained a paragon of serene beauty, her lips curved in a gentle, almost enigmatic smile, her eyes calm pools of a forgotten blue. But the reflection was a different story entirely. In the ornate antique mirror, Lady Seraphina's eyes, while still the same shade, held a profound, unspoken sorrow, a depth of anguish that seemed to swallow the light. The delicate curve of her mouth in the reflection quivered, a suppressed tremor of emotion just beneath the surface, as if holding back a scream or a sob. And then, one afternoon, bathed in the soft, diffused light filtering through the tall study windows, Alara saw it with undeniable clarity. A faint, almost translucent track, like a dried tear, tracing a path down the reflected Lady Seraphina's cheek, vanishing just before the jawline. It was impossible, illogical, yet undeniably present. The serene oil on canvas remained pristine, unblemished by any hint of distress, but its mirrored twin wept silently, a ghost of emotion trapped within the silvered glass. Alara's mind, ever rational, scrambled for explanations. She blamed the angle of the light, shifting her position, tilting her head, even moving a floor lamp closer and then further away, hoping to dispel the illusion. Perhaps the mirror itself had a flaw, a subtle imperfection in its ancient glass that distorted the image. She tried to convince herself that the patina of age on the silvering was playing tricks, creating phantom shadows. She even tried physically moving the mirror, struggling with its heavy frame, dragging it a few inches to the left, then to the right, hoping a change in perspective would break the spell. When that proved futile, she attempted to reposition the portrait itself, carefully lifting the heavy frame and shifting it slightly on its hook. But no matter how she adjusted the lighting, her own viewing angle or the placement of the artifacts, the unsettling disparity persisted. In fact, her concentrated focus seemed only to intensify the phenomenon. The reflected Lady Seraphina's sorrowful gaze seemed to deepen, the faint tear track more pronounced, her quivering lips more desperate, as if her silent suffering was amplified by Alara's attention, almost begging to be seen, to be acknowledged. It was then that a chilling realization began to solidify in Alara's mind, pushing aside the last vestiges of rational doubt. This was not a trick of light, nor a flaw in the glass, nor a figment of her imagination. The reflection was not merely a distortion of the painting, it was something else entirely. It had become the primary antagonist, an entity, a manifestation that defied every known law of physics and perception. It wasn't just a warped image, it felt like a separate living presence bound within the reflective surface. It was a truth that the portrait itself meticulously concealed, a hidden anguish brought to life only through the mirror's silent testimony. This reflection was a window into a hidden reality, revealing a version of Lady Seraphina that the world, and perhaps even her own family, had never been meant to see. The calm, painted face was a mask, and the mirror was stripping it away, revealing the raw, unadulterated pain beneath. Driven by this profound and unsettling mystery, Alara embarked on a desperate quest for understanding. She began to research Lady Seraphina, hoping to unearth an explanation for the spectral sorrow that haunted the mirror. She spent hours in the estate's sprawling, dusty library, poring over old family documents, meticulously preserved letters, and brittle historical records. She visited the local historical society, sifting through microfiche and yellowed newspaper clippings. Each piece of information she found painted a consistent, almost too perfect picture. Lady Seraphina, the matriarch, was celebrated as a woman of unparalleled grace, unwavering composure, and serene beauty. Every account described her life as idyllic, her marriage harmonious, her disposition tranquil. She was the epitome of Victorian elegance and virtue, a beacon of calm in a tumultuous world. The official narrative was a seamless tapestry of happiness and dignity, completely devoid of any hint of tragedy, struggle, or profound sadness. It was a life story so flawlessly serene that it felt almost manufactured, too good to be true. The stark contradiction between these glowing, idealized accounts and the silent, weeping reflection in the mirror gnawed at Alara's soul. The historical records insisted on a life of tranquility, while the mirror screamed of unspeakable grief. It was as if two completely different women were being depicted. One, a revered ancestor, serene and untouchable. The other, a tormented soul trapped in a silent scream, visible only to Alara, only through the silvered glass. The more she read, the more the chasm between the documented history and the reflected truth widened, leaving Alara feeling increasingly isolated in her terrifying discovery. She was facing a truth that history had deliberately buried, a sorrow that her ancestors had painstakingly erased from the official record, a secret that now, centuries later, was desperately trying to break free. The subtle shifts in the mirror's reflection had been unnerving, a quiet whisper of despair beneath a placid surface. Now, however, that whisper had become a silent scream. Lady Seraphina's reflected eyes, once holding a deep, unspoken sorrow, now appeared wide with an unadulterated terror that seemed to pierce Alara's very soul. The elegant curve of her reflected mouth was contorted into a silent, agonizing shriek, a grimace of pure horror that made Alara's stomach clench. It was no longer a subtle difference. It was a stark, horrifying transformation, a desperate plea for help trapped within the glass. This drastic change in the reflection coincided with a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the house itself. The comforting silence that Alara had initially cherished began to fracture. Sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature would send shivers down her spine, not just from the cold, but from an icy dread that seemed to seep into her bones. These cold spots were most pronounced in the study, where the portrait and mirror held their silent vigil. Faint whispers like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor would sometimes brush against her ears, too indistinct to form words, yet undeniably present, seeming to emanate directly from the study, even when she was in another part of the house. Objects, too, began to subtly shift. A book she had left on her bedside table would appear on the floor in the morning. A teacup, placed carefully on a saucer, would be found inexplicably moved to the edge of the desk. Small, insignificant displacements at first, easily dismissed as her own forgetfulness or the quirks of an old house. But as they accumulated, an unsettling pattern emerged, suggesting a presence, an unseen hand at work. The most pervasive and terrifying sensation, however, was the feeling of being watched. It was a constant, suffocating awareness, a prickling on the back of her neck that never truly faded. This feeling intensified dramatically whenever she neared the study. The weight of unseen eyes pressing down on her, especially when her gaze inevitably fell upon the mirror, where Lady Seraphina's reflected terror seemed to intensify, beckoning her closer, demanding attention. The house, once a haven of quiet solitude, was slowly transforming into a cage of creeping dread. Alara's initial academic curiosity, her detached attempts to rationalize the phenomena, now evaporated completely, replaced by a visceral, all-consuming fear. She could no longer conjure logical explanations for the wide, terror-stricken eyes in the mirror, nor for the phantom whispers and the pervasive chill that permeated her home. The house, which she had so eagerly anticipated making her own, had become an oppressive entity, its ancient walls now seeming to press in on her, suffocating her with an unseen presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent a jolt of terror through her, twisting her stomach into knots. Sleep offered no escape. Indeed, it became another battleground. Her nights were plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams that felt disturbingly real. She would find herself wandering endless, darkened corridors pursued by an unseen force, or trapped in a room where the serene portrait of Lady Seraphina would slowly, agonizingly distort into the monstrous visage of its reflection, its silent scream echoing in the void of her subconscious. She would wake in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs, the lingering dread of the dream clinging to her like a shroud, leaving her physically exhausted and emotionally frayed, barely able to distinguish the night's horrors from the waking reality. The once comforting sanctuary had become a source of profound torment, stripping away her sense of security and leaving her vulnerable to an encroaching terror she couldn't comprehend. Desperate to break free from the suffocating isolation of her fear, Alara reached out. Her first call was to her closest friend Sarah, a pragmatic and grounded woman. Alara carefully recounted the escalating oddities, the reflection's horrifying transformation, the inexplicable cold, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. She expected concern, but Sarah's voice on the other end of the line was laced with uncomfortable skepticism. "Alara, darling, are you sure you're all right? It sounds a bit much. Maybe the old house is getting to you. You've been under a lot of stress with the inheritance." Sarah's words, though meant to reassure, only deepened Alara's despair. She tried to explain further, to convey the chilling reality of the reflection, but her friend merely offered dismissive explanations: faulty wiring, drafts, and overactive imagination. Later, she confided in her aunt, a distant but kindly relative who knew Lady Seraphina's story. Her aunt listened patiently, but her response was equally disheartening. "Oh, Ilara, dear, you must be careful not to let your imagination run wild in that big, empty house. Seraphina was such a gentle soul. Perhaps you're just lonely seeing things?" The concern was genuine, but it was for Alara's mental well-being, not the supernatural threat. Each conversation left Alara feeling more isolated, more profoundly alone in her predicament. The world outside her haunted walls refused to acknowledge her truth, forcing her to question her own sanity even as the malevolence from the mirror grew. Was she truly losing her mind, or were they simply blind to a reality too terrifying to contemplate? The doubt gnawed at her, a secondary torment to the escalating terror, leaving her increasingly desperate for answers no one seemed willing to believe. Amidst this growing psychological torment and relentless physical manifestations, a flicker of hope, or perhaps a new, deeper dread emerged. One particularly restless night, unable to sleep, Alara found herself drawn back to the study, not by fear, but by a desperate need to understand. She stood before the antique mirror, its ornate frame now seeming to twist in the dim light. Lady Seraphina's reflected face, a mask of silent anguish. Her gaze drifted from the horrifying image to the heavy, dark wood of the mirror's frame, tracing its intricate carvings. Her fingers brushed against a section near the bottom where the wood felt slightly looser. With a gentle push, a small, almost invisible panel gave way, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment. Inside, tucked away and almost fused with the aged wood, was a small, tightly rolled parchment. Her heart pounded as she carefully unrolled the brittle paper. It was a faded, almost illegible note, its script delicate and archaic, barely decipherable. The ink was so faint she had to hold it at various angles, her breath catching as fragmented words slowly revealed themselves. False faces, trapped souls. Beware the looking glass's truth. A binding, a ritual. Protect the innocent. Sever the threads. Cryptic, fragmented, yet they resonated with chilling power. They hinted at a forgotten ritual, a protective charm, a warning against deception and imprisonment. The note was not just a historical curiosity, it was a desperate plea from the past, a guide, perhaps, to understanding the horror unfolding. It suggested the mirror was not merely passive, but an active participant, a vessel for something ancient and sinister. The discovery, while terrifying in its implications, ignited a new spark within Alara. She was not mad. There was a truth hidden here, a secret waiting to be unearthed, and perhaps a way to fight back against the creeping darkness. The mystery had deepened, but so too had her resolve, even if born from sheer terror. The cryptic, faded words on the parchment ignited a furious, desperate resolve within Alara. The terror remained, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a burning need for answers. Her sanity, so recently doubted, now felt vindicated. She was not mad. She was merely seeing a truth others had deliberately, or perhaps fearfully, ignored. The false faces and trapped souls weren't figments of her imagination. They were the very essence of the horror unfolding in her ancestral home. With the note clutched in her hand, she knew she had to delve deeper, beyond the polite, sanitized versions of history her family had preserved. Her investigation intensified, transforming from a casual curiosity into an obsessive quest. Alara spent every waking hour poring over dusty tomes in the estate's neglected library, venturing into the small, forgotten village archives, and even seeking out the oldest residents, hoping their memories might hold fragments of local legends or forgotten folk tales. She devoured faded newspaper clippings, meticulously cross-referenced parish records, and even deciphered snippets from a crumbling handwritten diary belonging to a distant cousin of Lady Serafina. The official family history painted Serafina as a paragon of virtue, a gentle beauty who lived a life of quiet grace. But Alara now understood that this was a carefully constructed illusion, a narrative woven to protect the family's esteemed reputation. The reflection in the mirror, with its raw, visceral anguish, was the true story, screaming silently from behind a veil of imposed serenity. Slowly, painfully, a darker, suppressed history began to emerge from the shadows of forgotten records. Lady Serafina's tranquil life, it turned out, was a meticulously crafted facade. She had indeed been a woman of breathtaking beauty, but her marriage to Lord Alaric, a man renowned for his charm and influence, was far from the blissful union depicted in family lore. Scattered entries in the cousin's diary, often written in hurried, almost frantic strokes, hinted at Alaric's volatile temper, his possessive nature, and a chilling streak of cruelty that he reserved for the privacy of their home. Serafina was not merely trapped in a loveless marriage, she was imprisoned within it, her spirit slowly crushed under the weight of her husband's tyranny. The diary spoke of her fading laughter, her increasingly withdrawn nature, and a profound personal tragedy, the loss of a child, perhaps, or a secret betrayal, that was swiftly and ruthlessly covered up. The portrait Alara discovered was commissioned not as a celebration of her life, but after. This profound suffering had taken its toll, a deliberate attempt by Lord Alaric to project an image of peace and contentment, to maintain the illusion of a perfect union, thereby preserving his own family's untarnished image in the eyes of society. It was a cruel mockery, a painted lie designed to silence her anguish forever. The more Alara uncovered about Serafina's tragic existence, the more she understood the mirror's sinister role. It was not merely an antique decorative piece, but a profoundly symbolic and possibly ritualistic object. Family records, though sparse on details, revealed it was a wedding gift to Serafina and Alaric, an heirloom passed down through generations, rumored to possess uncanny abilities. Some whispered it could reflect one's true self, stripping away all pretenses, while others spoke of its more sinister capacity to trap emotions, even spirits, within its polished depths. It was considered a family heirloom of immense, almost mystical power, often employed in protective charms for the household, but conversely also rumored to have been used in darker enchantments, a conduit for forces best left undisturbed. The mirror, Alara realized with a shiver, was not just a witness to Serafina's suffering. It was an active participant, a silent accomplice, reflecting a truth that the portrait deliberately obscured. It had absorbed her silent screams, her hidden tears, and the terror that had become her constant companion. As the pieces of this grim puzzle clicked into place, the true nature of the entity began to unfold, revealing something far more insidious than a simple haunting. The reflection in the mirror was not merely Lady Serafina's suffering soul, weeping for release. It was something else entirely, a separate, malevolent entity that had latched onto her profound and suppressed pain, feeding off it like a parasite. The mirror served as its conduit, a gateway between worlds, while the serene portrait acted as a lure, drawing unsuspecting eyes to the surface, where the suffering was amplified and consumed. This parasitic spirit wasn't Serafina herself, but a dark consciousness that had found a powerful anchor in her anguish. It had twisted her torment into its own grotesque manifestation, a living echo of her despair, now amplified and directed, seeking to perpetuate its existence by feeding on the fear and sorrow of anyone who dared to gaze upon its deceptive surface. Alara understood now that she wasn't just observing a ghost. She was confronting a predatory force, ancient and cunning, that had found a home in the intersection of a lie and a profound tragedy. The cryptic parchment, a fragile whisper from the past, had indeed ignited a new terrifying resolve within Alara, but it had also, perhaps inadvertently, provoked the very entity it warned against. The moment she had touched the hidden note, a subtle shift occurred in the house, a deepening of the oppressive atmosphere, as if the air itself had grown heavy with unseen eyes. The entity in the reflection, once merely a sorrowful manifestation, now began to exert a far more direct and insidious influence on Alara's waking and sleeping hours. Her nights became a landscape of terror, the nightmares no longer abstract psychological distress, but vivid, visceral encounters. She would wake screaming, her throat raw, her sheets tangled, convinced she had felt cold. Spectral fingers brush her face, or heard the rasping whisper of a name that wasn't hers echoing just beyond the veil of sleep. Each morning she rose physically exhausted, her body aching as if she had wrestled with unseen forces throughout the night, her emotional reserves utterly depleted. During the day, the despair became a suffocating shroud, an inexplicable heaviness that settled upon her, crushing her spirit. Waves of irrational anger would surge through her, a burning resentment towards the house, towards the portrait, towards Lady Serafina herself, emotions that felt alien, not truly her own. Then a paralyzing, primal fear would grip her, an overwhelming sense of dread that left her gasping for breath, her heart hammering against her ribs, even when nothing outwardly threatening was present. It was as if the entity was not just feeding on her emotions, but actively injecting its own dark essence into her, attempting to cloud her judgment, to possess her very being. She found herself staring into the mirror not out of curiosity, but out of a morbid compulsion, watching as the reflection of Lady Seraphina grew gaunt, skeletal, the once sorrowful eyes now burning with a malevolent, predatory hunger. Sometimes, when Alara's gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, she would swear she saw the reflected hand twitch, a spectral finger reaching out from the mirrored surface, a chilling attempt to bridge the gap between their worlds. The boundaries between her reality and the entities began to blur, her sanity fraying at the edges. Feeling her grasp on reality slipping, her own mind becoming a battleground for unseen forces, Alara grew desperate. She tried every folk remedy she could recall from childhood stories, every protective charm she could hastily research online. She scattered salt across the thresholds, hung dried herbs above the doors, even attempted to draw ancient symbols on the windowsills with chalk. Each attempt felt futile, a childish gesture against an ancient, formidable evil. In a fit of terror and frustration, she tried to cover the mirror with a thick velvet cloth, then the portrait with a heavy canvas. But these actions only seemed to infuriate the entity. The moment the reflection was obscured, the house erupted in a cacophony of spectral violence. Pictures flew from walls, shattering against the floorboards. Doors slammed shut with bone-jarring force. The temperature in the study plummeted to an unbearable chill, and the whispering voices intensified, forming a guttural chorus that seemed to mock her feeble efforts. It was a clear message. The entity would not be ignored, would not be contained by such simple means. It wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, and it was growing stronger, bolder, with every passing moment. Alara realized she was out of her depth, that this was not a problem she could solve with sage and salt. She needed true understanding, a deeper knowledge of the ancient forces at play. Recalling the fragmented hints of a ritual and binding from the note she had found, Alara knew she needed to seek out someone who understood such obscure, terrifying things. Her initial attempts to confide in friends or family had been met with disbelief and concern for her mental state, leaving her isolated. This time, she would not seek sympathy, but expertise. She scoured local historical societies and obscure online forums, eventually unearthing the name of Dr. Alistair Finch, a reclusive academic rumored to specialize in regional folklore, ancient curses, and the more esoteric aspects of local history. He lived in a dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of the nearest town, surrounded by towering stacks of dusty tomes and forgotten manuscripts. Alara arrived at his doorstep, a trembling wreck, but armed with the tattered parchment, her detailed observations of the reflection, and the harrowing accounts of the house's escalating phenomena. Dr. Finch, a man with a wild mane of white hair and piercing, intelligent eyes, initially listened with a skeptical, almost dismissive air, his fingers steepled under his chin. He had heard countless tales of haunted houses and family curses. However, as Alara recounted the precise, chilling details of the reflection's independent movements, the emotional contagion, and especially the specific wording of the ancient note, his skepticism began to visibly crack. He picked up the faded parchment, his brow furrowing as he studied the archaic script. His eyes widened slightly when Alara described the mirror's history as a wedding gift, its rumored ability to reflect true selves, and the meticulously suppressed tragedy of Lady Seraphina. He took notes, his pen scratching furiously on a yellowed pad, asking precise questions about the mirror's ornate frame, the portrait's materials, and the exact nature of the disturbances. After nearly 2 hours of intense questioning, Dr. Finch leaned back in his creaking armchair, a profound gravity settling over his features. He confirmed, his voice low and serious, that Alara was likely dealing with something far more complex and dangerous than a simple haunting. The combination of a powerful, reflective surface, deeply suppressed emotional pain, and an ancient, cryptic warning suggested the very real possibility of a powerful, ancient entity, one capable of using such elements as a gateway, feeding on anguish, and manifesting with terrifying intent. His words, though terrifying, were also a profound relief. Alara was not mad. The reclusive local historian, a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, her spectacles perched precariously on her nose as she meticulously examined the ancient parchment Alara had discovered, finally looked up, her gaze piercing and grave. Alara sat opposite her in the dusty book-lined study, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten knowledge. Dr. Thorne's initial skepticism, worn thin by Alara's unwavering conviction and the undeniable veracity of the cryptic note, had evaporated completely, replaced by a profound, almost weary understanding. She tapped a gnarled finger on the parchment. "This isn't merely a warning, Alara. This is a desperate confession, a cry across centuries." The truth, when it came, was far more terrifying than Alara's worst imaginings. Dr. Thorne explained that the entity was not the ghost of Lady Seraphina, yearning for peace or justice. No, it was something far older, far more insidious, a dark, parasitic spirit, a malevolent echo of primordial anguish that had been inadvertently trapped within, or perhaps inextricably linked to, the antique mirror for centuries. This entity fed on profound emotional suffering, thriving on the raw, unexpressed pain of human hearts. Lady Seraphina, with her meticulously suppressed grief and agony, had provided an irresistible anchor. Her profound, hidden suffering, the very torment she had been forced to conceal behind a facade of serene beauty, had become a powerful beacon for the entity. It had latched onto her, using the mirror as a conduit to project her torment, creating the horrific reflection Alara had witnessed, while the portrait, commissioned to immortalize a lie, kept her true image deceptively calm, a perfect bait. The portrait, Dr. Thorne elaborated, her voice a low, resonant rumble, was a gilded cage, Alara. It captured an idealized version of your ancestor, a public image of tranquility, while the mirror, in its cruel honesty, became a window to her true, agonizing prison. The entity wasn't Seraphina. It was a shadow feeding on Seraphina, projecting her pain, twisting it for its own sustenance. It has been doing this for generations, subtly influencing, subtly tormenting, finding new anchors in the hidden sorrows of your family line. The implication sent a chill straight through Alara's bones. This wasn't just about an ancestor, it was about a generational curse, a slow, insidious draining of emotional energy that had perhaps manifested in countless subtle ways throughout her family's history. The entity's ultimate goal, Dr. Thorne warned, was to fully manifest, to break free from its reflective prison, and to escape into the physical world, potentially by draining Alara's life force completely, or even worse, by possessing her body, using her as a new living vessel. The malevolent eyes Alara had seen in the reflection were not just an expression of Lady Seraphina's suffering, they were the hungry, predatory gaze of the entity itself, seeing Alara as its next meal, its next host. The house, once a symbol of legacy, now felt like a carefully constructed trap, and Alara, the unwitting inheritor, was the intended prey. The weight of this revelation was crushing, yet it also brought a terrifying clarity. Alara was not mad. She was targeted. The entity was real, powerful, and it intended her harm. But with understanding came the possibility of action. Dr. Thorne, seeing the flicker of resolve in Alara's eyes, began to outline a dangerous, ancient ritual, a method passed down through whispers and forgotten texts, designed to sever the entity's connection to both the portrait and the mirror, and ideally banish it forever. This was not a quick fix or a simple exorcism. It was a complex, perilous undertaking, a direct confrontation that would require specific, rare items, precise timing, and immense personal courage from Alara. This ritual, Dr. Thorne explained, her voice gaining urgency, is not just about breaking a spell. It's about confronting the very essence of deceit and suppressed suffering that allowed this entity to thrive. It will force you to face not only the malevolent spirit, but also the painful truths of your family's past, the very lies that fed this darkness for so long. The preparation involved gathering esoteric components, a sprig of night-blooming jasmine, historically associated with truth and illusion, a shard of obsidian, a powerful protective stone, pure rainwater collected under a new moon, and a specific chant in a dead language, a language of binding and release. Each item held symbolic weight, each step a critical component in building the barrier needed to contain and then expel such an ancient evil. Dr. Thorne emphasized that the ritual was a delicate balance, a dance between light and shadow, truth and illusion. One misstep, one moment of doubt, and Alara could find herself not only failing to banish the entity but potentially strengthening its hold, or even becoming permanently linked to it. The stakes were impossibly high, the path fraught with peril. As Dr. Thorne detailed the intricate steps, Alara felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This wasn't merely about lighting candles and reciting words. It was about an act of profound will, a spiritual battle. And then came the most unsettling part of Dr. Thorne's warning. The ritual, she explained, might demand a significant personal cost or sacrifice. Ancient magic often requires an exchange, Alara. You seek to sever a powerful ancient bond. That severance may demand something of equal value from you. It might involve destroying a cherished heirloom, something deeply personal that held sentimental value, a piece of her own past, perhaps even a physical object of the estate itself to break the generational chain. Or, more ominously, it could demand an emotional sacrifice, a confrontation with her deepest, most primal fears, or a risk to her own spiritual integrity, leaving her forever changed, perhaps scarred. Alara had to make a conscious decision to proceed, fully aware of the dangers, understanding that there might be no turning back. The expert warned her, her eyes fixed on Alara's, that the entity would not yield easily. It would fight back with all its accumulated power, attempting to manipulate her fears and doubts, twisting her perception, trying to break her resolve before she could even begin. It would whisper insidious lies, conjure terrifying illusions, and exploit any weakness it perceived. It will try to convince you that you are alone, that you are unworthy, that you are mad, Dr. Thorne stated, her voice firm. It will play on your deepest insecurities. You must be prepared for a battle not just of will, but of spirit and mind. Your courage, Alara, must be absolute, for your very soul could be at stake. The weight of this choice pressed down on Alara, heavy and suffocating. The path forward was terrifying, but the alternative, to allow the entity to consume her, to perpetuate this ancient horror, was simply unthinkable. She had to fight. She had to break the cycle. Alara stood before the ornate mirror, the portrait of Lady Seraphina opposite, its serene gaze a stark contrast to the storm brewing within the room. The night-blooming jasmine, its delicate fragrance now strangely cloying, lay beside the obsidian shard and the shimmering rainwater in a silver chalice. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Alara began the ancient chant, her voice gaining fragile strength as the guttural syllables filled the suffocating air. As the first words of binding left her lips, the study plunged into absolute darkness, extinguishing the candles. Only a sickly green glow emanated from the mirror's surface, illuminating the horrifying transformation within its depths. The reflection of Lady Seraphina, once merely sorrowful, now twisted into pure terror. Her painted features stretched, the serene smile ripping into a gaping maw, eyes bulging with unholy light. It was a monstrous visage, screaming silently from behind the glass, its ghostly cries echoing in Alara's mind, threatening to shatter her resolve. Objects erupted into motion. Bookshelves groaned, ancient tomes crashed to the floor. The temperature plummeted, a glacial chill stealing Alara's breath. A violent, unseen force buffeted her, threatening to break her concentration. The entity fought back, unleashing its full, ancient power, desperate to remain bound, to continue its parasitic existence. It was a maelstrom of raw, malevolent energy pressing in, trying to crush her spirit. The mirror's surface rippled, and the monstrous reflection lunged forward, spectral hands clawing at the glass, attempting to break free, to drag her into its abyss. The physical onslaught was merely the prelude to the true battle, a psychological war within Alara's mind. As she struggled to chant, the entity projected terrifying illusions. Shadows danced, coalescing into figures of her deepest fears, accusing faces of doubters, her disappointed parents, lamenting this cursed legacy. Insidious whispers slithered into her thoughts, amplified and distorted. "You are weak, Alara," they hissed, "just like her. This house will consume you just as it consumed Serafina." The mirror, no longer merely reflecting the monstrous entity, began to show distorted reflections of herself. Her face in the glass became gaunt, hollow-eyed, her skin withered, a vision of what the entity intended. The whispers intensified, preying on every insecurity, every past trauma, every moment of self-doubt. "You are mad. No one believes you. You brought this upon yourself. You are unworthy." The entity sought to break her concentration, to shatter her will, to make her believe resistance was futile, that she was destined to be its next victim. It conjured memories of her deepest regrets, painting agonizing pictures of a bleak future, her mind unraveling into insanity. The air grew heavy with despair, a suffocating blanket designed to smother her courage. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to stop, to run. Her voice wavered, the ancient words catching in her throat, her resolve teetering. The entity's silent scream from the mirror intensified, a triumphant, mocking roar in her mind, sensing her weakening grip. Just as despair threatened to swallow her, a flicker of clarity pierced the oppressive darkness. Amidst the chaos and whispers, a thought, clear and resonant, blossomed in Alara's mind. Dr. Thorne's words echoed, "The entity thrives on the lima, the suppression of her pain." The key to defeat was not solely the ritual, but an act of profound empathy and, more importantly, truth. The entity had thrived for centuries on the deliberate concealment of Lady Serafina's suffering, on the carefully crafted facade of serenity the portrait maintained, while the mirror reflected raw, unacknowledged anguish. This lie, this suppression, was its sustenance. Alara understood she had to deny it that sustenance. She had to acknowledge and speak the truth of Lady Serafina's suffering, to give voice to the ancestors' silenced anguish, to break the cycle of deception. This was the counterforce. She looked at the monstrous reflection, seeing not just a demon, but the amplified agony of a woman forced to hide her torment, trapped by a generational lie. "You were not serene!" Alara cried out, her voice raw, cutting through the entity's assault. "You were in pain! You suffered, Serafina! You were trapped, and no one saw it, no one acknowledged it." As she spoke, a strange, profound shift occurred. The monstrous reflection convulsed, its terrifying visage flickering, weakened by the truth. The whispers in Alara's mind faltered, losing venom, their power diminished. A new wellspring of strength surged within Alara, born of compassion and unwavering conviction. Her terror remained a cold knot, but now tempered by fierce determination, a purpose greater than her own fear. She pushed through the remaining illusions, their power waning with each truthful word. The distorted reflections of herself receded, replaced by her own resolute face. She focused on Lady Seraphina's true, tragic story, a woman whose agony had been buried under layers of polite society and familial pride. "I see you, Seraphina," Alara whispered, her voice resonating with unexpected authority. "I see your pain. I acknowledge your suffering. You deserved better than to have your truth hidden, to have your sorrow exploited." With each empathic word, the entity's hold loosened, its monstrous form in the mirror shrinking, recoiling from the unvarnished honesty. The chaotic energies subsided, objects settling, the frigid air slowly warming. Alara, hands steady despite tremors, reached for the sprig of night-blooming jasmine, its petals now glowing with inner light. This was the final critical step, the symbolic act of acceptance and release. She crushed the jasmine, its potent fragrance filling the air, then scattered the petals over the mirror's surface onto the still flickering reflection. As petals touched the glass, a brilliant, blinding flash of pure white light erupted, engulfing the study. A piercing, agonizing shriek, audibly guttural and filled with ancient fury, tore through the air, vibrating through Alara's bones. It was the sound of an entity torn from its anchor, a parasitic spirit denied its sustenance, a lie undone. Alara closed her eyes against the light and sound, bracing for the ultimate confrontation, for the final decisive moment of banishment. She had spoken the truth, and now she would see it through. As Alara's voice, raw with empathy and truth, echoed through the study, reciting the ancient words of release and acknowledging Lady Seraphina's profound, suppressed sorrow, a seismic shift tore through the room. The monstrous visage in the mirror, which had been contorted in a silent, hateful scream, suddenly froze. Its eyes, burning with malevolence, began to dim, flickering like dying embers. A guttural, unheard shriek seemed to reverberate not through the air but through the very fabric of existence, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish and defeat emanating from the reflective surface. The oppressive cold that had permeated the room for so long intensified for one agonizing second, then dissipated entirely, replaced by a strange, almost warm stillness. The mirror, the ancient, ornate looking-glass that had been a prison and a conduit for centuries, did not shatter with a deafening crash as Alara might have expected. Instead, its surface began to ripple, not like water, but like smoke. The glass turned milky, then completely opaque, a swirling vortex of impenetrable gray that seemed to absorb all light and reflection. It pulsed once, a final, almost imperceptible throb, before settling into a dull, inert flatness. The once vibrant, sharp silvering behind the glass seemed to peel away, leaving only a dark, lifeless void. It was no longer a mirror, but a window into nothingness, its power utterly extinguished, its malevolent occupant banished to wherever such dark things go when denied their sustenance. Alara, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the spiritual battle, slowly turned her gaze to the portrait of Lady Seraphina. The change was subtle, yet undeniably profound. The painted image which had always held that unsettling, deceptive serenity masking a deep, historical agony now radiated a different kind of calm. Lady Seraphina's eyes, once holding a hidden sorrow that only the mirror dared to betray, now possessed a newfound peace. There was still a quiet dignity in her gaze, a gentle acceptance that replaced the lingering shadow of unspoken pain. It was as if the truth, finally spoken aloud, had granted her spirit the solace she had been denied in life. The entire atmosphere of the house, which had long felt heavy with unseen eyes and ancient dread, lifted completely, leaving behind an astonishing lightness, a sense of profound relief. Alara sank to the floor, her limbs refusing to support her, utterly spent. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Physically, she was exhausted beyond measure, every muscle aching, every nerve frayed. Emotionally, she felt raw, stripped bare by the intensity of the confrontation. Yet, amidst the profound weariness, an undeniable current of triumph surged through her. She had faced the impossible, stared down a parasitic entity feeding on generational pain, and emerged victorious. The house, her ancestral home, was quiet once more, but it was a quiet entirely different from the eerie, watchful stillness that had preceded it. This was a peaceful quiet, a stillness that hummed with the gentle hum of normalcy, a welcoming embrace rather than a suffocating shroud. She had not only saved herself from a terrifying fate, but had also, she believed, brought peace to her long-suffering ancestor. Lady Seraphina's story, once a carefully constructed lie, was now acknowledged, her pain validated, and her spirit, Alara felt, was finally free. The journey had transformed Alara in ways she could never have imagined. Her perception of reality had broadened, forcing her to confront the unseen layers of existence. Her understanding of courage had deepened, revealing it not just as the absence of fear, but as the unwavering resolve to act despite it. She had learned that true strength lay in vulnerability, in speaking difficult truths, and in the profound act of empathy that could heal wounds stretching back through generations. The experience had forged her, tempered her, leaving her with an inner resilience she hadn't known she possessed. As days turned into weeks, the peace in the old house solidified. Alara often found herself in the study, gazing at the portrait. It was no longer an object of dread or a source of mystery, but a symbol. Lady Seraphina's serene expression, now genuinely peaceful, served as a constant reminder of the importance of truth, of acknowledging past pain rather than burying it, and of the immense power found in facing one's fears, both external and internal. Alara understood now that true serenity did not come from suppressing suffering or pretending it didn't exist, but from confronting it, processing it, and ultimately healing from it. The portrait, once a lie, was now a testament to resilience, honesty, and the enduring legacy of a courageous young woman who dared to break an ancient cycle of torment. Her journey had been harrowing, but it had led her to a profound understanding of her own strength and the interconnectedness of past and present, a truth reflected not in a mirror but within her own heart. Alara's story reminds us that some reflections run deeper than the surface. If you were captivated by this tale of hidden truths and ancient curses, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and let us know in the comments what other mysteries you'd like us to explore. And remember to subscribe for more thrilling narratives.